Warning. The following content may contain elements that are not suitable for some audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. And as always, the warning is about me, not my guest today. I am so totally excited to have our next guest with us. It's one of the people that I admire and look forward to talking to as many times as I can in the industry. I'm going to let him do his own introduction so I don't destroy his reputation, but very, very, very excited about this. Before we get to that, a couple brief announcements. Next week is the 31st of October, which is Halloween, boo, 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 and all that for all of you who celebrate. But we're having an amazing conversation on corporate narratives with Jeff Gomez and Alan Bergson. The week after that, I forgot, but it's also another good one, and I'll let you know later what it is. And the week after that, we have a tremendous one, trying to get Liz Miller to commit to the 14th of November, so we can do the one that we actually screwed up. I screwed up last week or the week before, 2 weeks ago. And after that, we're going to take a brief break for Thanksgiving, come back for a couple more shows in December, and then we're done for the year. So you only got to put up with me 4 more times this year with that warning. And then we have an amazing way to get into the next year. We're going to start bringing in some of the voices that I have neglected to bring in the past because they are associated with vendors, and I have a thing against vendors. But anyways, having unraveled all that, 4 shows left. This is the one that matters, episode 15. And we're going to have a fantastic conversation with the one, the only, Doc Searls. Doc?
Hi there, Esteban.
Hey, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. I'm doing well.
So thankful, so grateful you're here. Like the kids say today, I appreciate you.
Is that what they say?
Yeah, that's what they say.
They can still do that? Oh, that's good.
I don't know. They get away with a lot of things. I don't know how that works, man. But we look like 2 old farts talking about young people now. But
yeah.
Anyways, let's do. Speaking of young people, let's do a quick introduction for anybody who's been living under a rock, and doesn't know who you are. Brief intro. Who are you? Why are we talking to
you? My reputation exceeds me, I think. I'm a longtime journalist. I was the editor-in-chief of Linux Journal for a while. I wrote for Linux Journal for 24 years. One of the people who kind of helped the world talk about open source and Linux. So we helped with our mouths and our fingers, not with any code, but that was a lot of fun. And I've had affiliations with 4 great universities that never would have let me in: UCSB, NYU, Harvard, and now Indiana University. I am in Indiana right now. We are actually living here for now and probably indefinitely. Technically, we still live in Santa Barbara. We still vote there and have a house there, but I've gotten very involved with the university here, or at least with the corner of it that hosts us. Is called the Ostrom Workshop. It's kind of a center hanging off the side of it that was started by Eleanor Ostrom when she won her Nobel Prize in economics for work on the commons. And so, as you know, my wife and I, especially my wife is Joyce, and she never wants the credit, but she deserves it, have been talking about all kinds of things that are world-changing ideas that have been completely without effect for the most part, for a long time. And I was one of those cyber utopians back then, before the dystopia sunk in. Co-wrote the Cluetrain Manifesto, which is probably.
I was going to say, you wrote a little book that most people credit
a little book that
the start of this craziness, right?
Yeah, well, a funny thing about Cluetrain is that, back when Twitter was still Twitter, it was. I haven't checked lately, but the word Cluetrain was used on Twitter like 4 times a day, you look it up now, and there are many, many thousands of instances of it online, maybe millions by now, and it's still not in Oxford. It belongs in Oxford, I think, at this point.
Wow.
The word
Cluetrain. So my challenge getting to this conversation was
sure.
How to focus what we're going to talk about, because like you said, not only have you done a lot, but you have done we can pick any of the things you've done and have a 2-3 hour conversation about it. I mean, you I know you're modest and you won't talk about yourself that much, but you change the way we communicate with each other and participate in communities and societies. You change the way we look about privacy and the information that we share online when you were at Harvard. You're changing the way we think about how to make better decisions in the enterprise, which is what this show is all about. So but when we were exchanging ideas on this, you pointed me to a TED talk that you did not too long ago that was entitled "When the Idea Is Not the Whole Idea." Did I get that right? Or
What did I say? What was I overheard to have said?
when the idea when the idea is not the whole idea, wasn't it? Or was it something like that?
Oh! The story is not the whole story. When
The
the
story is
story
not
is
the
not
whole
the story.
story. That's right. When the
Yeah.
story is not
Well,
the whole story. Yeah.
so there actually this is an impossible subject, but I like those kind. Um, as journalists, like back when I worked in newspapers 1,000 years ago, actually it's close to that, 5% of 1,000, 50 years ago. Um, your assignment editor, your managing editor would always say to a reporter, "What's the story? What's the story? What's the story?" If it just wasn't a story, it wasn't going to get in the paper. And stories are the basic format of human interest. The problem is that stories exclude facts because, in fact, any fact that doesn't fit the story is really not useful to the story. But the facts may be relevant, they may be important, and the world is full of stuff that matters that doesn't fit into a story. Um, I'm so there's sort of two sides to what I said in like the 10 minutes of that TED talk. Um, One is that. We've lost the center that held when we still had newspapers and magazines and a kind of common sense of understanding about what's happening in the world, even in cases where that understanding was wrong. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was actually fairly popular early on, um, became unpopular as time went on. I refused to serve in it, and I ended up getting out of it. But because I was eligible. I'm that old. I was definitely going to go over there if I went into the army, and I felt it was a wrong thing. The but the story up to that point was we're fighting communism, and the communism front is here, and communism is an intergalactic force that gets people's brains and makes them bad, um, and we knew that was bullshit, and also that the people of Vietnam we had no business there. The French had no business there before that, and the whole colonial area was ending, and we kind of knew that, but that was a story. There was a story, and then later a different story got told. We call them narratives now, and but it's still the same thing. And all stories have three parts. They have three elements. You have a character or characters. You have a problem or conflict of some sort, and you have movement toward a resolution, whether that movement ever arrives or not. And if your story doesn't have any of those things, then there's it's not going to be a story. It's just an incident. It's just a pile of facts. But that's one thing. But another thing is the world is full of interesting and important facts that we really need to hold on to. And they may not, because they don't fit in a story. We we tend to um, exclude them or forget about them or take them out of the archives. CNET, according to Gizmodo, back in August, is getting rid of their archives or a lot of their archives because they
Mhm.
it's bad for SEO. Well, that's also bad for news. I mean, you need these archives. They were a canonical publisher, and of course, the only quote that Gizmodo got was from a marketing person who said, "Well, this is all about the money, basically, if you translated it, and the money is what you get from SEO, and if you're running nothing but current stuff." I'm not even sure it was a good case, but
Right.
it spoke to how little old stuff is held in regard, and Google's not much better at this point, even though it will find old stuff. Um, I have I put some Easter eggs into things I wrote back in the 90s that are still on the web that
Did
Google
you did
used
you
to
go
find.
back and put him? Did you put him after the fact, or you put him while you were writing?
I actually I put them in not when I wrote them, but a little bit after, like
Okay. Yeah.
still when, and as I really put it in back, it may even been before Google. I just wanted to see if is my own way of testing whether Hotbot or Alta Vista or whatever else is the current search engine of the time would find this stuff if I did a keyword search. And Google found it until like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and now they're not finding it. It just they don't see those things. because they're
Mm.
biased to the new. And it's not like I haven't linked to them. I mean, there are links to them, but PageRank is not how they operate anymore. They're operating by some other algorithm that maybe even they don't know,
Yeah.
but it's deprecating the old stuff. And so I've been writing on my blog for the past month or so about news. This kind of completes what I'm doing in Indiana. Um, uh, there needs to be a news commons, and I think the easiest place to make one is locally, because
Mm.
locally the facts matter. Whether or not the road got done, or whether or not the section got annexed, or that zoning got changed, is a matter of importance, and it may not make a good story. But the newspaper's not telling that anymore, because the newspaper's almost gone. But there are lots of independent operators that are doing an amazing job of writing about local stuff. So
How do we make the decision between what matters, the facts that matter and the facts that don't matter? How does a person who's facing a decision, or has to do something, looks at the information and says, okay, we're going to talk about this but not this?
you have uh, this is a weird answer, but you need obsessives. Okay, so
Hmm.
there's a guy here in town. His name is Dave Askins. He's become a friend. Um, Bloomington is also known as B Town, and he has something called the B Squared Bulletin. He does nothing but report on City Hall. He cares about City Hall, and he's obsessive about City Hall. And he'll tell you, "I'm not writing about anything else. Maybe a few things that are like near City Hall." And he goes to all the meetings. Stuff that would bore the asses off lots of other people,
Hmm.
he finds exciting. That's interesting to him. There's another guy who does nothing but features, and another one who does nothing but or close to nothing but photography. Um, and
How do you find those
so
people?
you
Sorry.
need the
Yeah,
obsessives to care about
you
this
need.
stuff. That's
How do
sort
you
of the,
find the obsessives outside of? I mean, I agree
I
with you
don't
on the
know.
local side, but when you're looking at a global world, I mean, how do you find obsessives in a global world? Do you have anything
Uh,
that?
I hate to say you search for them, but
Yeah, no, that's
it's
fine.
it's kind of, a lot of it depends. People do what they're interested in, and they avoid the things they're not. And um, I mean, for me, like I've been like at first I just started searching for, like, obviously AI is got a big deal. It's going to matter. Who cares about AI? I did the same thing with like Ukraine a year and a half ago, right?
Hmm.
And when Twitter was still operative, I made this Ukraine list on Twitter. Um, And a similar thing's going on right now for me with the Middle East, because it really feels to me like I think. I mean, I woke up this morning thinking, has World War III started? Well, it's the middle of the day in the Middle East, so maybe maybe something bad has already happened.
Yeah,
And but who or what do I need to pay the most attention to? I'll never catch up, but I want to know stuff, right? So now
yeah,
I'm starting to, okay. I I want to read about how was it Israel started? I think I know 1948 and all that, but
yeah,
I don't know that much, and I don't. It's not even what I want to have a conversation about it. I just want to be informed. So you
right.
just start digging. I think that's just, but that's what reporters do. But the difference for me is I'm not writing a story. I'm just wanting to know. But
Hey,
I mean, it's sort of all
yeah,
over the map here. But yeah,
yeah. No, you're fine. This is good. So Alan Bergson has a question. Says, how do you vet the obsessive? And I will add to that. I mean,
wow.
do you need to vet the obsessives? You know.
Well, yes and no, especially if you find the obsessive you're interested in is wrong about a lot of stuff, or is totally biased. I think everybody brings their biases, whatever they are, and their biases are
Yeah, yeah.
interest. I mean, I have an obsessive interest in broadcasting. I started out in radio. I wanted to be in radio as a kid. I was on the radio for about 10 minutes. Uh, got my nickname, the Doc nickname, from that, because my real name is David, and there are too many of those, and so I got it because another guy I knew was named David. But um, I mean, I almost think I have an unhealthy interest, especially in the engineering side of it. And in 10 years, knowing about broadcast engineering is going to be like knowing about steam power or spinning mill, or yarn spinners or some other thing like that, because it's going away. AM is almost, or it's already gone for the most part in Europe. It's going away here in the US. FM is doomed too. It's a matter of time. Broadcast TV is almost dead.
Yeah.
The I mean, what you get, who has an antenna anymore outside? 1% or less of the people have that at this point.
Hmm.
And yet stations are spending millions to keep their gear up in order to comply with regulatory requirements. But I'm obsessed about that stuff, and I hang out with other obsessives that know about that stuff. But I also wonder if I'm wasting my time, which I probably am,
Well,
but I
so,
can't help it.
So let's use you as a case study. You're obsessed about, communications and broadcasting. So how do we know that you know what you're talking about? I mean, do we look at your background? Do we look at what you said, what you did?
Probably those things, but I would, the way to check anybody is sources. What am I sourcing? If I write about
Mm,
something, where do the links go? What am I saying that what am I pointing to? That's not just me. I mean, that's one of the wonderful graces of the web, is that it's all about sourcing. That's what links are for. It's all
yeah,
sources, and I write very linky text, and I'm suspicious of somebody who doesn't write linky text, because or doesn't put in footnotes or other things like that, to make it easy for people to find, where they're getting, where your intermediary is getting their information.
yeah. So when you find them and you vet them, how do you use these obsessives to, kind of solve the first problem that you said, which is like, there's facts that are being left out of the story, right?
Well,
For convenience or politics, compliance, because. But I mean, can we use the obsessives to point to us in direction that we haven't yet?
I don't. There's not a program here. I mean, I just pulled that out of my butt today, just now on this show, when I said, "Where do you?" You asked where I go. I said, "You go to obsessives." I hadn't even thought about that before this, so I don't have a program for it.
Oh,
It's just that,
this is my show, dude. So this is what we do.
it's like, but I mean, it's partly, who and I mean, I got to know you through Nitin Bajadia, right? Who's a
Yep,
mutual friend, and
yep.
um, and I've read some of your stuff. I've adopted some of it. I just think is fabulous. And uh,
You're gonna make me
I
cry,
mean,
dude.
we are. I mean, it's funny. I had a really interesting conversation with Tim O'Reilly a long time ago about authority. Who's an authority? What's an authority? And um and we realized that we are all. Oh, it came from the word information. Like, what does information mean? Well, it's derived from the verb to inform. What's the verb to inform derived from? Well, the verb to form. You're changing, you're shaping something. And if you're informing me, you're changing me, right? And so this one liner came out, which is, we are all authors of each other. And what we call authority is the right that we give others to change us. So you're an authority for me on the customer journey, right? By twisting it into a figure eight, whether it's the own cycle and the bicycle. And
That's right.
that was hugely influential on me. I was changed by that. I'm still changed by it, because I realized I'm sitting here looking at all the stuff that I own, and I'm not buying anything right now. So I'm not in a customer journey in any way at the moment, except in
Right.
the sort of static sense that I'm owning a bunch of stuff, and probably too much. So that's part of it. I mean, who you might not even think, who do I wish to be informed by, right? Here's an interesting thought. I mean, humans are weird in the sense that we never stop learning if we're going to be fully human. And even back in tribal times, people went off and did the things they were good at. You're good at picking
Hmm.
berries, you're good at carving stuff, you're good at, you know, putting a stencil of your hand on the wall of a cave, or, weaving things, or, hunting bison, whatever it was that we did. And not all of it was good. The large animals disappeared everywhere humans went. you know,
Oh, those are
let's not
details.
stop at the
See,
mammoths.
this
Let's
is
kill all the whales. It's
that now
like,
you go, you're going back on sourcing. That's just details that don't need to be sourced. They're
yeah,
not true.
right. That's like Professor Peter Schickley, who did the PDQ box series, had one of his one-liners where, those are facts. You can't have opinions about facts.
Well, oh, I do want to. I don't want to go down that way, because you know where we end up. But yes,
Yeah.
I agree. We kind of have opinions about facts. But so then, I mean, but this is serious. I mean, like, I think that you're hitting on some good stuff here. I mean, we need to to source. Alan Bergson said earlier, this is true. You got to show your work, show where you're coming from and what you're talking about. Neaton said he's not a good source for. He said I'm a bad source for anything. I don't agree with that, but I got more value out of Neaton that he will let you know. But so we go to the sources, and then we vet our obsessors, and we have the obsessors, and we have the information, right? And that's what it comes down to. I mean, that's what it comes down to, information, right?
Yeah, it's I mean, what's more human than to want to know more at all times,
Oh.
and but also what's more human than to opine about it.
This is what actually gave Twitter its life. It's like, wait, I can say what I want and there's no
It's a
consequences.
backyard fence. It was gossip. It's pure gossip, and that's I mean, Yuval Noah Harari in his first book, Species, or maybe it was his first book, I don't know, but Sapiens, that's what it was.
Sapiens, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, talked about the role of gossip in how humanity works. We needed to know, who was honest and who wasn't, who was cheating on who, and and who stumbled or hurt the other guy. And this is just part of what makes us human. But then if we're going to make civilization, you actually need to construct things out of solid materials, whether it's an opinion or a bridge, right? And so that matters too.
There's except bridge is a good example, because there's been many bridges that collapse because of opinions and materials that would be inferior and superior, right? But we keep going back to what you said. I mean, like, there's facts that are being left out of the story for convenience, politics, compliance, you name it. And I think that I'm trying to make this show about better decision making, and I think that one of the problems that we have in decision making is finding the right information. So I love the concept of finding the obsessives and bringing new information. So let's say that you found them, and we are going to make Alan happy and vet him, and we have the right people, and we have the right opinions, and they influence our work and what we do, and then what? How do we actually? Can we convince other people to go in our direction and look at the same information?
Well, that's one thing you could do if you're the sales type. I mean, I think Malcolm Gladwell said that. I think back in whatever that first book was, the one that came out at the same time as Cluetrain, and did even better. You need what he called salespeople, mavens, and connectors. And I think one reason that Cluetrain was a success is that at least three of us were all three of those things. I'm a salesman. I'm a connector. I'm a maven. But here's an interesting thought. I mean, it's so much of what we do is just ad hominem arguments all the way down. It isn't turtles all the way down. It's ad hominem arguments. Every academic paper is full of sources, and the sources that are quoted are authoritative because they came from Yale, or they came from this organization or that organization, but it's still ad hominem arguments. We're saying so and so said it, so therefore it's true. Now, of course, science and math are a little bit more hard than that, and but I mean, do we know the Big Bang is actually how the universe started? It's an opinion. It's a good opinion, probably. We'll never be able to check it. We'll have to go back and ahead of it and see what was there.
That's actually a really good question, because that's an assumption that we take for granted, unless we go into religion, that we're not going to go into in this show ever. But I mean, unless you go into that alternate theory, I mean, that's an assumed. We all assume and agree that the Big Bang is where it started, but we have no way of really knowing, right?
Yeah.
Are we starting from a faulty base by saying that we all agreed on that, or because everybody agreed, because the whole community agreed, it's a good source?
Yeah. Well, these are paradigms. Thomas Kuhn and the on whatever was what he. I'm trying to remember the name of the book, but it doesn't matter. It's the only book he wrote that mattered. So Kuhn, Thomas Kuhn. But he talks about the structure of scientific revolutions, I think. Is that we had a paradigm in geology, which is one of my obsessions, actually, and don't trust me on that one because I'm a total amateur, but I'm interested in it. And for the long time, geology was based on the Bible. Oh, the world is 6,000 years old, and there were people who would say it to the day. There's a guy who added up all the years that were in the Bible, and said, "Oh yeah, it's 6,429 days old," um,
Yeah, no,
and
I
but then it was Earth forces, and then in the late 70s, I mean, in the 70s, the plate tectonics came along and changed everything,
yeah,
and that, and now something may replace that. They're all paradigms, so we operate on, you know, we we just stand on what we think is true, and if it, and hope it works. But there's a lot of things we thought were true that didn't work very well, like that the sun ran around the Earth rather than the other way around.
mm-hmm.
Um, and once we realized that we, in the collective sense, that 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 the sun was the center of what was going on with all these planets and things, that okay, now that makes sense. But in our everyday world, I mean, right now there's a paradigm, and it's making millions of dollars, zillions of dollars, billions of dollars. That the best way to advertise is to get personal with people and
Oh
spy
my
on them,
God,
and
yeah,
and that's. I mean, I think we'll look back on that as the way we look back on drunk driving and smoking. It's like
yeah,
that. It's something. Well, just
yeah,
everybody did it, so it was
yeah.
okay.
So, by the way, to close up, the Gladwell book is The Tipping Point,
That's the one,
and
right?
Thomas Kuhn's book is The Structure of Scientific Revolution.
Very good.
Yeah.
So you went to the
I,
source on that, and that's good.
no, actually,
I was not a good source for that information.
no, you're a good source. You just remember the name, which is what happens to me all the time. But Brent helped me with the Gladwell book, and I looked up the other one. So, and then while you were talking, Alan made a comment about I can't say this because of my accent, but intersubjective testability, which is, I don't understand how people come up with these words, but make it easy for people to test and reproduce your conclusions. And I think that's fair. I mean, like, show
Yeah,
your work. You were talking about sourcing, we were talking about showing that.
yeah,
So we're in a good place. I mean, we are, my position on this, we are in one of the most interesting times in humanity so far, for different reasons than before. And don't get me wrong, there were many interesting times at the time, but this one for us is because somebody curious like you and me, I can go and find any piece of information on anything and find six different versions of it and find sources and like come up with, like, quote unquote, like you were saying, the ultimate accepted truth that we all go for, right? And that to me is what makes it interesting. The access to those facts is there if you want to take the time to go through it. That
yeah.
that's where the human discourse is at an advantage.
And I think there's an interesting thing happen with AI and LLMs, with large language models. This morning I was in a conversation. It was a digital one online with somebody who wanted to know what the tower was on the top of a building near Fenway Park in the mid 50s. That was an FM station. This is part of with the obsessives, they care about broadcasting. And we'd already seen, it's got to be, those look like FM bays on that tower. Tower's not too high. What's over there? Oh, it looks like maybe that was a hotel that was there, maybe. And nobody had an answer. So I went to Bard, and I went to on Google, and I went to ChatGPT. ChatGPT had nothing.
Yeah.
Perplexity AI had a brief, partly right answer. Bard gave you 3 drafts of an answer. All 3 of them, along with Perplexity.ai one, said it was this one station, WNAC. It was their FM station. But the rest of what they had in all 3 drafts, most of it was bogus. I mean, I know from knowing enough of the history, was at least partially bogus, but it's derived from having looked across a massive amount of material, some of which is wrong. and
Hmm.
and
Yep.
you
Yep.
know,
Yep.
and if you think about it, I mean, what an AI does, what an LLM does anyway, is and this is sort of almost a cliche at this point. Well, it's just putting one word after another, one word after another. If you think about the way we operate, we don't even know in many cases how we're going to end the sentences we start, or remember how we started the ones we're now ending. And we rely on, and yet somehow we convey meaning, and meaning comes across, right? And AI doesn't know how to do that, but it does know how to put one word after another better than we do. And it
Oh
can be
my
just as
God.
wrong, it can be just as wrong in creative ways that look creative to us, but are just like a machine having hiccups all over the place.
That's gold, man. I never thought about it that way, but it's true. I mean, I know myself, and I don't speak for anybody else. But when I start a sentence, I have no idea. I know what I'm trying to say, but I find the words as I go along. I start with like my idea and then try to explain it, and then finding the words, and then find the conclusion to give a segue to the continuation of the conversation. So that's gold, man. I love that stuff.
And
Yeah,
an interesting thing too is that having short-term memory, I mean, it's actually not a good thing, and you might say, like, well, we tend to forget details after a few seconds. They're gone,
yeah.
right? I give you a phone number, unless you're really gifted at that, you're not gonna remember it 2 minutes from now. If you write it down now, you'll remember it for a few seconds. Um, and and yet, I mean, I think that's actually a weird grace because it makes us focus on meaning. It makes us, there. Another interesting thing is that there's, according to Michael Polanyi, who's a philosopher I studied in college. I was a philosophy major, but it was a small college, had like two professors, and one of them obsessed on Polanyi. So Carl Polanyi, his brother, was the more famous one, but Michael was a scientist, actually. And he says there are two kinds of knowledge. There's tacit knowledge, which is more than we can tell, and there's explicit. And explicit is, this is a drum, this is a glass, this, anything that has a noun. But tacit knowledge is how I know to drive a hammer with a nail with a hammer. It's how I know to form words. I can't describe that. I have tacit understanding of that, and almost all of what we know is in fact tacit. That was Polanyi's whole case. And AIs don't have tacit knowledge. Computers only do explicit things, right? There's nothing tacit in there at all. But tacit is what makes us human. And that's sort of
Yeah.
like we have a series going at IU right now here, that's Indiana University, on artificial, human plus versus artificial intelligence. We're bringing in a series of speakers on this, um,
Hmm.
which are really interesting because, I mean, there's human intelligence, and I mean, what we call what the hell is intelligence anyway? Intelligence is a quality. It's not a quantity. IQ testing notwithstanding. And I speak as somebody, by the way, who has an 80-point range in known IQ scores. There's no such thing as an IQ. It's
What? No, come on, man. I'm smart. Somebody told me.
So
Somebody
yeah,
tested
yeah,
me and
see,
told me.
anybody who gets a high IQ score knows that they're smart because they got a good score. you
Exactly.
know, and but but take it from somebody who's had bad scores and got punished for them. They're going to
It's all
send
about
me.
knowing how to take a test. It has something to do with
It has a
intelligence.
lot to
It
do
has to
with
do
that,
with
and it has a
pattern
lot to do with
recognition.
practice. If you do a lot of
Yeah.
crosswords, and if you're into
Yeah.
those games, and they're fun for you, you're going to do well. But and when I was getting out of the ninth grade in my junior high school, they were going to send me to the vocational technical high school to learn a trade because my grades were terrible and my IQ score was low.
Huh.
But yeah,
I,
I got
I
over
had
it.
I had a part of that. My grades were always terrible. They continued to be terrible through the moment that I decided I needed to do something to get out of college. Otherwise, I would be there forever. And my IQ score was high, so I was always a head scratch for everybody. It's like as I moved through school, they're like, "I don't get it. Your IQ is high, but your grades are horrible." So
There's a great book by John McPhee about Ted Taylor, he's like the other Oppenheimer. He's one of those guys that did nuclear bomb stuff,
yeah,
and he was like kicked out of Berkeley, and he was kicked out of some other places. But a couple of teachers said, I think he's kind of gifted in some ways. We think, and so we ended up getting kind of assigned to Los Alamos, almost as a like let's scrape him off on Los Alamos, right? And ended up being like the greatest scientist they ever had. Uh, it's
yeah.
we're all good at some stuff, and we're not good at some other stuff, and that's just part of being human too.
Okay. So there were two things he started this with. He said there's 2 points to make on when the stories on the whole story. The number one was some of the facts have been left out of the story because of convenience, politics, or whatever. What's the second one, if you
The
remember?
second one is how do we remake the center that we lost? We had a center that held us together, and
Mm,
the divisions that we have now, where we used to just have disagreements, now we have frozen conflicts. It's one thing for you know the Israel and the Palestinians in whatever form to have a frozen conflict. That's
mhm,
one thing, but to have in our own Congress here in the U.S. a frozen conflict where no Democrat and no Republican is going to vote with the other side just because they have a giant ad hominem argument against them. We're just not going to cooperate
yeah.
with them. And that,
Yeah.
we have a frozen conflict now where we didn't used to have one. Um, when we all sat down every night and we watched CBS, NBC, or ABC here in the U.S., or for that matter, like BBC in the UK, or the state television wherever else it was, because generally it was a state television. Um, Everybody kind of agreed on that, whatever it was, something like that's
Mm.
going on in Russia right now. There's exactly one narrative that's coming out, and everybody finds themselves agreeing with it because that's what they're consuming. But how do we remake that center? And how do we remake the cohesion that holds us together? Because what we have with the story, with the obsession with the story, um, you start with character. I mean, look at what Trump did with character. Trump is brilliant at using character. He is himself an amazing character,
Right.
whether you like him or not. He's good at characterizing other people. Low energy Jed, Little Mario, Crooked Hillary, Sleepy Joe, and that stuff worked. He went
Hmm.
through 17 straight. He ran the table in 2016, um, and then he ended up getting elected. And in many ways, I mean, he's a savant. He's an idiot in a lot of other ways, but he's really good at that stuff. Um, and he's still formidable. And he has a contingency that loves him for his character. And they see him in a story. This story is the Democrats are all out to get him. And everybody with
Yeah.
Trump derangement syndrome is out to get him. And they're on his side no matter what else is going on with him. Oh, he's flawed. He's a sinner, you
But
know?
issues like that point to issues to the conversation around power. I mean, power is what actually makes somebody stray from the center. Center is not powerful. Center is cohesion and
That's
agreement. I
right.
agree with you.
Yeah.
And when you leave cohesion and agreement before, you go into power. So then, how do we revert from power to cohesion and agreement? I mean, is there a way? Is there a path from one to the other
Well,
so
I
we can
mean,
get back into a good
if
way?
if you look at power as like think of a power distribution like a bell curve, right? Well, there's
Hmm.
a center there, and if most of the people are kind of in that space where they kind of all agree about this set of things, I guess it kind of comes down to what you agree about and what you believe in, right? And if you, I mean, I think there's a pretty broad agreement about climate science at this point, to some
Hmm.
degree. I think there's probably far from unanimous agreement, but there's at least I think it still Ukraine is a little bit less controversial than it could be, though there are people on the right now that are wanting to make it more of a thing. Um, I mean, I think there's a lot that people tend to agree about, but again, as I get back to the local, I mean, this is just speaking personally. I want to work on stuff where I think actually will have an effect, where there actually is stuff people can agree about, or can and have a polite disagreement about. Here in Bloomington, there's a disagreement about whether the city should annex adjacent regions, um, and there are two sides to it, and there are arguments about it. I'm not familiar with them. I'm still relatively new here, but they're civil. These are people that shop at the same stores and know each other and bowl together or whatever. I think, I think civic life um, is incredibly important, and part of it is just we live in a digital. I mean, you said we live in this very interesting time right now. I think it's the most liminal and transitional time possibly in human history.
Yeah.
As we're becoming digital beings as well as physical ones, and as Marshall McLuhan says, we make our tools and then they make us. We're being made digital right now. I mean, this phone I carry around is part of me. I walk around with this thing, and it's an extension of myself. And I actually wonder when I want to get together with somebody in another city, how the hell did we do that 20 years ago, 30, 50 years ago? You said I'll
Mhm.
meet you there, but if they weren't there, what did you do? You had no today. Well, you have a phone, right? But we lived for millennia without phones, but now we have to have the phones. We're changed by that, and yet we're not fully cognizant of it. We're just dependent on it. Um, but anyway,
So
this is.
is it a question of
The
awareness then?
physical. But my point
Sorry.
is the physical.
Yeah.
It anything we can do to ground ourselves in the physical world is a good thing,
Okay.
especially if we do it with other people. I guess that's kind of a takeaway.
I think it's a fantastic thing what you're doing because you're talking about an evolution, a generational evolution, the last
Yeah.
15 years, where we went to technology and we went to dependent technology and phones and bad opinions and all the shit that we've gone through the last 15 years. And what you're saying, if I'm reading it right, it's like, okay, we had our fun, but now if you want to really get back to doing something right, maybe we should go back and look at how we connect with each other at a physical level, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
What can we do together that are physical things?
Okay.
Go
And you think
places
that,
that.
this is the way back to the center, to the cohesion and agreement you were talking about? It's like, let's get
Yeah,
back to one to one.
I think we had to do a bit. I think we'll do better locally than we're going to do nationally right now. I think locally, um, we share real interests here. Is that road going to get built? Right now there's
Mhm.
they're going to put in a homeless shelter down the street from our house here. Not and and I think everybody here, pretty much being a good liberal, wants that to happen.
Right.
But it changes things. Somebody went through our trash last night,
Yeah.
and left a bunch of it on the street. And I don't know if that was a homeless person or not, but it wasn't a raccoon. It was a person, and they got out bottles and they got out cans, and they want to go somewhere with bottles and cans and go do that. But there are this is a local thing. We can care about this and have mixed feelings about it. You know, I
Yeah.
I have mixed feelings about somebody going through my garbage. On the other hand, I you know, I appreciate that we live in a civilization and we have to be civil with each other in a civilization. And it's harder to make an all digital civilization, I think.
Do you think it starts at the local level and then grows into a more regional, then eventually national and eventually global? Or is it like
I
just,
hope so. I
yeah,
hope
okay.
so. I it,
I,
it,
I,
it
I do have the same. I'm just asking the question, hoping you say yes, because if you say no, it's a much more awkward
I was
conversation.
he's like, nah, I don't know. I'm just
Yeah,
here. I'm
it's only
just
about
doing
me and my
I'm just
backyard. I don't
doing
care about
some
anybody
shit. I
else.
don't know. It's whatever.
No, but that's the thing. It's like, I mean, I think that a lot of the decisions, I've been saying for a while that we solved all the easy problems to solve. We have the intractable problems left to solve. We have these intergenerational problems, things that are big. And I think that, I mean, I agree with you that the thing is maybe start local and then grow to global. But uh, how do we actually reconcile this idea of local into a bigger regional and eventually national, eventually global? Is there a way to reconcile that cohesion, that
I
agreement at
don't
the
know.
local level?
I'm not sure it's reconciliation. I think it's just let's do stuff that might work, and then if that works, then other people might notice that it worked and do it somewhere else.
Yeah,
Uh, and or just those who are more focused on a regional or national or international level, see what worked over there. Let's do that here. Let's see what it is. I mean, there's so much that, and so much of it is accidental. I mean, there was a my wife attended a lecture yesterday before we went to a fabulous jazz concert. There's the Jacobs School of Music here is world class, and they have so many great performers. And this guy said that swing music, which swing big band music, which really peaked in 1935 to 1945. Um, they started, like I don't know, somebody in New York put together a band and it did really well locally, but they were on the radio and they were on the national radio. And when they took it on the road, but they were on the radio at midnight, and every night they did their live performance on the I guess the NBC network at the time.
mm,
And but it was at midnight, so they went across the country and they bombed everywhere they went. When they got to the West Coast, the crowds are crazy for it, and the reason was because it ran at 9 o'clock on the West Coast and it ran at midnight on the East Coast.
got it.
And it's just an odd artifact. It's just an odd coincidence. And so big band swing took off on the West Coast, and they brought it back to New York, and it became a national hit. And of course, records were being reproduced at that time. Everybody had a record player. They all had played 78s. The 3-minute song became the way to go because the records only lasted 3 minutes.
That's
You
right.
know,
Yeah.
there are all these little things you think that were weird constraints, and then we lose them. Like my son, who's now 27. when he was 15 and we came to New York. We had an apartment in New York and ended up going there from Boston. And we just went there, and we actually went up to 181st Street. We were north of there to pick up a radio at Radio Shack. Radio Shack didn't even have any radios. Of course, it didn't have itself after a couple more years. And we're walking back, and he asked me, and he's a bright kid at the time, he's still bright. He said, well, radio's dead. You know that, right? And I said, well, I think it's dying. He said, no, it's dead. And he said, what's the point of range and coverage? I don't get that. And, because, and I worked, it was the big thing, like the biggest station in New York when I was a kid was WABC, and you could get it at night all over half the country. And like country music was made by WSM in Nashville because you could get it at
Right.
night all over the South. And that range and coverage being limited also built local culture, and it built regional culture. Country music was made by one radio station in one town that now is Music City, USA, and most people don't remember that that's what it was about, or they weren't alive when that happened. But it was what was limited about it was what's important, and all of us had anybody who listened to the radio had an understanding of the inverse square law. That the farther you go, twice the distance, you get half the power. Things fade away, and now, you had to have an antenna to pick up radio or TV, and nobody knows about antennas anymore. They're buried in our
Right.
phones, and
Yeah.
they're buried in our Wi-Fi stations, and they work on frequencies that don't need a long antenna. They have tiny little antennas inside devices. And so that understanding of how things are put together isn't there anymore. I think there's probably a time when lots of people knew how to make lots of different knots, or knew how to knit or some other thing like that. And sensibilities get lost. So anyway, we're kind of way astray of something.
I would. Before I go to Alan's comment, which is a good comment, I want to ask you. So I would say sensibilities has been replaced by YouTube, because everybody knows how to tie a knot now. If you go how to,
exactly, yeah, and that's a fantastic thing. There's so many ways that all of us, we have a problem with something with the dishwasher or the toaster or some other thing like that, and you go there and say, oh, here's a hack to get the toast bits out of the toaster that doesn't have a door on the bottom, or some other. I just made that up, but I guarantee something like that is on YouTube for something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
So I want to go to this comment, continue to talk in local versus regional versus national. Alan says local is lived experience. As you expand, you lose direct connection, and I think that your swing
Yeah.
example and the country example, like are spot on into that. I don't disagree that it's lived experience, but I would say, we all malign Twitter. Or X, or whatever the fuck you want to call it. I don't care. I got out I got out 6-7 years ago. I'm never going back, and it doesn't matter to me, right? But we all malign it. But the concept of the online community and connections, to me, the most powerful thing the internet did was connect people from broad distances to be next to each other, right? Is that a factor in moving local to a bigger stage, you think?
Sure. I think it's kind of like, what did the bicycle do? It just made it a lot easier to get around and closer to each other. But the internet is such a radical thing. I gave a talk about this at the Ostrom workshop, I guess a couple of years ago. But and it was actually the talk was in October of 2019, and I opened it with recalling, there were no slides for this one, that the movie Blade Runner, which was made in like 1982, opens with a legend that says Los Angeles, November 2019. And that's when it was. And what it imagined was a future with buildings the size of mountains and off-world colonies and floating cars, where the protagonist used a payphone, and had computers with vacuum tubes in them, and you looked at a VDT that was, essentially a vacuum tube,
That's funny.
and did not imagine the miracle that we actually do have, which is here is it's not even a system, it's a protocol that allows every device and every person on Earth to be zero distance from each other at no cost or close to no cost, that's a miracle it's beyond loaves and fish. It's enormous. It's beyond enormous. And that, I mean, you're in Half Moon Bay right now. I'm in Indiana. We could have 10 other people in here that are all over the world, and the closest thing you might have is a sense of distance, is maybe some latency for the people who are farther away. But for the most part, we're all in one place, and it's not even a place. And
Hmm.
the way my wife talks about this is that it's kind of like we took away gravity. There's no gravity here. There's no distance. I mean, Craig Burton, my old friend, is now gone. Called the internet a giant zero, a three-dimensional zero, which is a hollow sphere in which every point, geometrically speaking, can be seen by every other point.
Hmm.
But it's hollow in the middle. There's no distance in there. It's like it's a giant zero between us all. And we've hardly begun to adjust to that. But in the same way as astronauts get used to no gravity after a while, you figure it out. And we're in this kind of weird world that coexists with the physical one, but has very different properties or absent properties. Absent is distance. We don't have it. Time is a bit of an issue. I line up the time zones. Oh, that guy's in Iraq. Well, what is that here? Or India is my favorite because it's like, even if it's 12 hours off, it's 12 and a half hours off because the whole
12 and
place
a
is
half
half
hours
an hour.
off. That's
And
right.
so it's got
Yeah.
this extra half hour in there,
Yeah.
you know. Um,
Look, it's about precision and like engineering training, right? Is that we're not 12, we're not 13, we're 12 and a half.
No, it's like, I know. And all I can think of is like, you guys are amazing that you stay up in the middle of the night to talk to us here.
Yeah.
But it's, but even that, I think that in, in those places, if you're living on the net, you're actually living on a completely different clock, especially if you're dealing with Western Europe, you're dealing with the sort of the centers of tech in the world. Well, I've talked to any number of people in India, for example, who say, no, we're always up late. We're always up at crazy hours because we have to deal with the rest of the world. We don't think so much like that here in the US. We're thinking, well, at the most, like, well, we're 3 hours off from each other. Yeah, I mean,
Mm,
yeah, you and I are 3 hours apart, but you're also
right.
9 hours from Central Europe, and that's a bit of an issue at times. I mean, I love the Eastern time zone because it's that much closer to Europe, you know, um, and I get to work in the morning before the West Coast wakes up.
Yeah.
and and then I
Yeah, but
start getting the calls.
if you ever if you want to connect with anybody in Japan or Australia or whatever, you're
Oh, yeah.
screwed because you're 17, you're what, 20 hours away, right? So you're like
Right,
you're
yeah, or it's,
yeah.
and yet you go backwards in time and then forwards a date, and it's,
That's right. What day is today? Yeah. And Alan agrees with you. He loves the Eastern time zone. He's in New York, in the New York State. But we got about 5-7 minutes left. I wanna circle this back to kind of where we started. Right, we started talking about when the story's on the whole story, and it's been 24, 25 years since you guys published the Cluetrain Manifesto, right?
No, it's
Out
less
there,
than that. We wrote it in '99 and it came out
99.
in
Yeah.
2000, so it's
Okay.
24 years.
23
Yeah,
years. Yeah, 23 years.
yeah.
And lo and behold, your prediction was basically the fuel for it was what, like maybe 2005, 2007 when everything started happening the way you guys foretold. So we got like 15, 20 years of experience, and like, what we said would happen happened, right?
Some
So
of it, some of it. I mean, there's so many things in it. The funny thing is, like, what matters are actually, there's a preamble. There's something actually Chris Locke wrote. He's the one of us who sadly is gone, and his voice is like the main voice of it. That sort of audacious
mm,
style. But he sent around to the other three of us because we're talking on the phone. Three guys talking on the phone, um, with each other. That's how we met. Because at that time, dial-up was expensive. If
yeah.
after you want to spend a lot of time on it, um, and it said, "We are not seats or eyeballs or end users or consumers. We are human beings, and our reach exceeds your grasp. Deal with it." And that was that became the first clue. Now, people remember Markets or Conversations, which was my one-liner, as the first thesis there. But the one ahead of that is that one that I just recited to you, which Chris wrote. And what it says is, if you have one clue to get this year, this is it. And that one. And the interesting thing about that is that we are still seats and end users and eyeballs and consumers, and our reach does not exceed the grasp of the big companies. If anything, our reach is less than their grasp at this point in some ways. I mean, Europe just basically kind of outlawed in their own way the five gatekeepers, they call them, because we're living we live inside Googleville and Appleville, and
Yeah.
so and so on the one hand, I think, I mean, what Cluetrain did was it declared a bunch of stuff about the internet. It was really about the internet. It's like, how do we make sense of this new place that we've got? This is like an amazing new place. Wow. And here's what we as people bring to it. And
Hmm.
and it struck a chord, and we were basically bringing clues. Here's a clue. Here's 75 clues, and most of them are packing material, by the way, for the most part. If you read through them, we made it 95 theses because that worked for Luther, and we called it a manifesto because that worked for Marx.
Yeah.
That was the marketing side of it.
So the 95 truths that matter, or the Cluetrain Manifesto, that was
Yeah, yeah. It's
the
just like,
working titles.
I mean, an awful lot of it was just blah, We just had to
Yeah,
say some stuff, and we
but it
thought about it
worked.
more when we wrote the book. The book was actually thought out. Where's the,
But it worked. This is the thing. It worked. I mean, it actually
oh, it
set the
definitely worked.
direction.
It worked in
Right.
some ways, yeah. And
So
it's
so
weird.
so go ahead.
So
Sorry.
let me just tell you this quickly. I I was spoiled by 2 things. One was the success of Cluetrain. It's like, because I thought, "Oh, wow, you could put something audacious out there, and it'll make a big splash, and I could do that again." Well, not necessarily. Then, and the second thing was open source. Like, a bunch of geeks got together. I was not one of them, but I reported on it, um, and decided, "Oh, free software is not going anywhere as a thing. Let's come up with open source, and we're all gonna talk about open source. We're gonna evangelize that." And I
Mm.
helped evangelize it, and that was a roaring success. It's still a success. And so those are 2 things that spoiled me. And then I created Project VRM and Customer Commons, and now I'm doing some things here. None of these are the successes that those first 2 things were. So,
VRM, talk about influence. VRM changed my perspective on the way we manage data in a way that I was talking at the time that I already work on VRM. I was talking to Cameron in Microsoft, who's
mm,
also gone, unfortunately,
yeah,
way too
sad.
young. But Cameron changed my perspective on security. You changed my perspective on privacy. I went from being like, the internet is a good thing to like the internet is the devil's playground.
It's
So
all those things.
yeah. So we talk about influence. That is completely different. But
It-
we got a couple of minutes. But my question was going to be like, how from when you wrote the Cluetrain Manifesto to now, how, if any, has changed, or what? It's a better way. What, if any, has changed on like decision making, looking at all the facts, looking at all the, the center, the agreement, all the stuff that you will be talking about. Has anything changed? Are we still doing the same thing that we did 25 years ago, but faster?
well, I think the biggest thing that's changed, and I don't know if so much a change. It's just that I think what we wanted to do with Cluetrain, not what Cluetrain itself did, but what we wanted it to do was get full respect to human beings as participants in this new place. Um and I think we've gotten part way there. I think we still have a long way to go, but the older I get, the earlier it seems. The digital world we're in now, one I would date really from the smartphone apps on smartphones, really like 2010, roughly, and to the world we have now where you can't operate without a phone in your pocket.
Hmm.
This is only maybe 12 years old, maybe not even that, in terms of at what point it reached ubiquity with at least the fully civilized world. Um, not the places without internet are not civilized, but the prevailing culture. I think there's a state change that's just started. Then we are going to be digital for the next, we're a decade in. It's going to be many decades or centuries or millennia more that we're going to be digital, and so it's just the beginning. We're just really early in this thing. So to me, Cluetrain was just a great statement at a moment about the state of this new place that is kind of a marker. It's sitting there as a marker that people can go back and look at and say, "Wait, I was kind of right about that. It's kind of maybe wrong about this other stuff, but it's kind of that. I get that. That makes sense." And um, so it did some good in that way. And but I think that uh boy, I mean, the internet is this great blessing, but it's a little bit like, you know, it's it's not Eden. It's what we got after we bit the fruit. It's like we got the fruit of everyone's knowledge, and now we have LLMs making no sense for us because it's all of that knowledge that wasn't entirely knowledge. It's just what people said. And it's the serpent saying back to you, you think you have knowledge? Well, this is what you said. It doesn't make I'll put the words together for you.
I'll make the final because we gotta go. We are out of time, unfortunately,
Sure.
because I can talk to you forever. But I always differentiate between knowledge and wisdom, right?
Yeah.
And I wrote this article saying, like, the best way to display wisdom is to, people said the best way to know about wisdom is to know that strawberry is a fruit, tomato is a fruit, but it doesn't go in a fruit salad, right? Or something like that. And I'm going like, okay, that's wisdom, but sure, let's. I would love to have the conversation, continue this forever.
Well, let's do it.
Unfortunately, we
Let's
have
do
to
it
go, but
sometime.
I'll have you back on the show anytime. We have so much to talk about.
Yeah,
This was
thank you.
fantastic. I will take forever the line about
And
LLMs.
I'll have to
We
have you
don't
on one of my
know.
shows too. So that's
Anytime. Happy
let's
to.
do it.
Happy to.
Let's do it.
Yeah,
That'd be
let's do
great.
that. So thank you very much for being
Okay,
here.
thank you,
Thanks
and thank
everybody
you,
for listening.
audience too.
And Brent, we're out.